So will you pray with me? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. One of the most terrifying scenes for me as a child watching The Wizard of Oz was not the flying monkeys, and it wasn't the giant, fiery, smoky head of the wizard himself. But it was when the Wicked Witch of the West skywrites the word "Surrender, Dorothy" on top of the Emerald City. See, up until now, the story had been one of Dorothy making alliances and making progress and conquering her fears and finding her power. And then we see that word surrender written in that smoky, ragged letters, threatening to unravel everything Dorothy has done, reminding her that in the bigger picture there are far more powerful forces out there who seek to defeat her. That surrender is such an ugly word. And I think for many of us, that word evokes images of defeat and submission and failure. When we surrender, we give up our power, we lose control over our destinies, and we lose ourselves in the process. Our superheroes are never supposed to surrender. Like Dorothy, they're supposed to fight till their very last breath, because surrender equals death, right? And death, as we all know, is the end of the story. Yet our fear of surrender is not just for these archetypal hero stories. It's pervasive in our own lives too, especially as 21st century Americans, where success and achievement and progress are our measure of worthiness. The pressure to be successful, to hide our weaknesses, to get ahead, to make our own way in the world, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and win at all costs. The drive to be as impressive as possible to the most people as possible is what drives our entire cultural and economic system. And those who learn how to play the game well are rewarded mightily by the powers who control it. At least it seems that way on the outside. I mean, you get financial security, right? Popularity, titles, bragging rights, more likes on your Instagram post and more friends on your Facebook page. And this is who you are, the worthiness game convinces us. And yet this game is ultimately a lie, an unsustainable lie. And we have no idea how corrosive it is until, exhausted and warped by never ever feeling truly worthy, we find ourselves kind of unraveling from the inside, unable to knit ourselves back together. So in that moment, the game steps in again, and it offers us solutions with resolutions and self-talk and self-help programs and anything that tells us how we can solve our problems through our own power and our own will. But as Albert Einstein said, a problem cannot be solved by the same mind that created it. We cannot beat the worthiness game by playing it. We can only beat it by letting it go altogether. And Lent is our season of practicing that letting go, that surrender. Now, for those of us who gathered here on Ash Wednesday, we took that first step of letting go when we received our smudges of ashes in our hands and we heard the words, "From dust you came, and to dust you shall return." In that moment, we surrendered from the fiction that we are superheroes, and we embraced the reality that we are mortal and we are vulnerable. That we are not so much masters of the universe, but carbon and stardust and flesh and blood. Not in control of the rhythms of life, but a small and beloved participant in the dance. And it is from this first surrender to the reality of our own eventual deaths that is the starting place for everything else. Because in one of Christianity's greatest paradoxes, surrender is the only path to real life. We must lose our lives to save them, Jesus tells us. Unless a seed dies, it shall not have life. Surrender is indeed at the heart of our faith, but it's a different kind of surrender, a different kind of journey than that of the superhero. It's an unexpected path of downward mobility that paradoxically is the only road that leads to resurrection. It's not about submitting ourselves to the coercive powers of the world that seek to enslave us, but of releasing ourselves into the radically loving arms of God who seeks to liberate us. Letting go of the burdens and expectations and measures of worthiness that keep us so tightly bound. Father Gregory Boyle is a Jesuit priest who runs Homeboy Industries, a gang intervention program that's located in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Los Angeles. His ministry to these kids, many of whom do not live to see their 21st birthday, has changed his ideas of success and worthiness. In his time there so far, Father Boyle has buried almost 300 young men. And he writes, 20 years of this work has taught me that God has greater comfort with inverting categories than I do. What is success? What is failure? What is good and what is bad? What is setback and what is progress? Great stock these days, he says, especially in nonprofits, is placed in evidence-based outcomes. People want to know if what you do works. Are you, in the end, successful? It's a hard question, he says, and my answer rarely satisfies them. Naturally, I find myself heartened by Mother Teresa's take, that we are not called to be successful, but faithful. And this distinction is helpful for me as I barricade myself against the dread of daily setback. 3 steps forward, 5 steps back. You trip over disappointment and recalcitrance every day, and it all becomes a muddle. And God intends it to be, I think, Father Boyle continues. For once you choose to hang out with folks who carry more burden than they can bear, all bets seem off. Salivating for success keeps you from being faithful, keeps you from truly seeing who's sitting right in front of you. Embracing a strategy and an approach you can believe in is sometimes the best you can do on any given day. If you surrender your need for results and outcomes, success becomes God's business. I find it hard enough just to be faithful. Jesus offers us the ultimate model of inverting the categories of success and failure. The ultimate model of faithfulness being found in the surrender of control to experience the true presence of God in what is happening and who is standing right in front of us. In our gospel story this morning, we share in a series of Jesus' surrenders. He begins by surrendering his old identity to the waters of baptism, an act of dying to an old way of life and being reborn in the new reality that he is God's beloved child. Jesus then takes that new identity and he heads straight into the wilderness to dare an encounter with the darkest parts of himself. And here he meets his greatest tempters, his need to control his own destiny, to master his environment, to feed his need for power and security, to play by the world's rules of worthiness. And while Mark uses the figure of Satan in this story, I think we 21st century folks might best understand Satan as a stand-in for our own egos. That force that puts our own security, wants, and needs above all. It is our ego that tells us that we can achieve success by ourselves, for ourselves. It's our egos that tell us we can't trust God. And it is our ego that keeps us afraid. Afraid that we won't have enough, earn enough, be enough. And it's a burden that all too many of us carry. And the only way to free ourselves is to surrender our lives to a force of love that is bigger than our fears. One that turns our worthiness culture upside down and that tells us that it is only through vulnerability, only through failure, that we can let go of our ego's illusions, that we can ever find true wholeness and true recovery on our own. It's only when we let go of this idea that it's all up to us that we can begin to take our first steps on that journey out of the darkness. Now, this process of surrender is not easy, and it's not quick, for it involves the transformation of our very lives. And in the scriptures, we see that this lifelong process is often symbolized with the number 40, which for the ancient Hebrews represented the span of a full human life. So the transformation of our consciousness from birth to death and back again is symbolized in this number. It's the number of years that the Israelites wandered in the desert, learning how to go from slavery to liberation. It's the number of days that Jesus spends in the wilderness. It's the number of times I have put on this microphone this morning. It's a number of days that Jesus spent in the wilderness learning how to let go of his frightened ego and instead to trust in God. And not by coincidence, it's the number of days in the season of Lent. Lent is our time of embarking on a journey of faith that can take us our whole lifetimes too. It's a long and winding journey, a slow and gradual releasing of what we thought we knew, and an often painful letting go of old patterns, old habits on our path to wholeness. But surrender is the only way that we can begin. And so that is what we all are going to do together this morning. When you came through these doors this morning, you were given a stone. So I invite you to hold this stone in your hand right now and to take a moment and to imbue it with whatever burdens or bondage you feel you are carrying in this moment. What fears are keeping you away from love? Put it in the stone. What anxieties are keeping you from trusting? What feelings of unworthiness are preventing you from experiencing the fullness of life that God dreams for all of us? And as the Spirit moves you, you're invited to come forward to the table on the center of the labyrinth and to surrender this burden that you are carrying. Surrender it to the heart of God by dropping it into that bowl of water. Surrender your fixations, your fears, your judgments, your compulsions. Surrender all of the burdens you've been carrying with you, the ones perhaps you've been trying to figure out for a lifetime. Just take a moment and breathe and rest and let it go. You are not in charge. You are not supposed to be. Surrender is not the end of your life. It is the beginning. May it be so.